Good evening, everyone. This is Ivan Yang speaking. I'm the Vice President of CFA Society Taiwan. It's a great honor to be invited to do the opening for tonight's event. So tonight's event is about GIPS, which GIPS stands for Global Investment Performance Standards. It's a set of voluntary standards used by investment managers throughout the world to ensure the full disclosure and the fair representation of their investment performance. The new published GIPS 2020 will be introduced in the event by Eddie Chen, the Asia Pacific GIS Product Channel Manager of CFA Institute. In addition, Taiwan local research on GIPS experience will also be shared by Professor Lee in tonight's event. So before we started, I would like to introduce two very important people. First, Eddie Chen. Eddie, welcome.
Hello.
Hi. So Eddie is right now our Asia Pacific GIS Product Channel Manager, as well as Professional Conduct Enforcement and Global Industry Standards at CFA Institute. Eddie is responsible for the management of investigations related to alleged violations by CFA charter holders, members, and the candidates in their professional activities. So if you are one of above, so be careful. And starting in 2018, Eddie has assumed additional responsibilities as the Asia Pacific GIS Product Channel Manager, accountable for the promotion of industry standards in the region. In his expanded role, Eddie frequently collaborates with various investment industry stakeholders, including GIPS standards sponsors, large asset managers, asset owners, financial market regulators, local CFA societies, and the industry associations. Prior to joining the CFA Institute, Eddie was regional financial controller and the company secretary at Inchcap Hong Kong Group, overseeing the finance, accounting, and the credit groups. He was also head of finance for Audi Hong Kong Group, where he was responsible for financial operations, reporting, planning, and analysis. Eddie graduated from York University in Toronto, Canada, with an MBA degree in finance. He's a CFA charter holder, a CIPM designation holder, and a certified management accountant. He also holds a law degree from University of Hong Kong. Eddie, you have done too many. So welcome, Eddie. It's an honor to have you here with us. Right now, I also like to introduce Dr. Wei-Hsien Li.
Hello, everyone.
So, Dr. Wei-Hsien Li is an associate professor in the Department of Finance at the National Central University School of Management. Dr. Li's research revolves mainly around corporate finance, including MMA's payout policy and the corporate governance. He has articles published in international and the domestic academic journals, including Journal of Business Finance and Accounting, Review of Quantitative Finance and Accounting Finance Research Letters, and the Reviews of Securities and the Future Markets. Dr. Li has taught different undergraduate, master, and PhD level courses, including Introduction to Finance, Financial Institutions and the Markets, Financial Statement Analysis, Financial Management, and the topics in corporate finance. His field focused on all-around training in communications and professionalism for future finance professionals. He won the Outstanding Teaching Award and the Public Service Award from the School of Management, National Central University. He also served as the faculty advisor for CFA Institute Research Challenges since 2013 and received the Outstanding Contribution Award of CFA Society Taiwan in 2014. So welcome, thank you, Dr. Li.
Thank you.
So Eddie, I'll leave the tonight's event to you guys.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ivan. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. Well, without any further ado, let me start by sharing my screen to get to the right PowerPoint slides. This should be it. All right, so can everybody see the slides on my screen? Just
Yes.
give me.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. All right, so we have a lot of materials to cover, so I'm going to dive right into this. Okay, tonight's topic is 2020 GIPS Standards. And oh, let me see. Okay, there. This is a brief agenda. I'll just talk very quickly about how GIPS standards support the mission of CFA Institute. And then I'll go over a little bit of the overview of the GIPS standards, about its background and history. And then I will go into some of the highlights from the 2020 GIPS standards, some of the changes in the new edition. So let's dive in right there. I will just cover some of the high-level numbers. CFA Institute charter holders now have reached over 170,000 people worldwide, and that covers over 160 markets. We currently have 9 offices around the world, and the number of local member societies now reached 158, and obviously Taiwan Society is one of them. And CFA Institute is an organization that supports professionalism and ethical standards. And we do so by looking at ethical standards on 2 different levels. We look at the individual levels, which is basically the foundation of the Code of Ethics and Standards of Professional Conduct. And as a CFA charter holder or a CFA Institute member, you would be familiar with the annual attestation, the professional conduct statements that you have to sign every year to ensure that you are abiding by the ethical standards for the year, and that's the requirement for renewing your membership. And that work actually goes to my other half, which is the professional conduct enforcement work. But at the same time, I want to tie that into the topic tonight, because the Code of Ethics and Standards of Professional Conduct is not only something that we look at on the individual level, on the membership level. It is also something that we promote on institutional level, on the firm level. And this is something that we work with. This is something that we promote and advocate through a product like the GIPS Standards and also the Asset Manager Code. The topic tonight is going to be focused on the GIPS Standards. So I just wanted to let you know how all of this actually ties into the mission of CFA Institute. And the ultimate goal is to put investors' interests first. And this is something that we remind asset managers daily. All right, so let's just dive right into the GIPS standards and some of the background. I just wanted to give you a quick, a simplified timeline of the history of the GIPS standards. As you can see, it goes back to the 1980s. And that shows you that the GIPS standards actually have a history of over 30 years, 30 somewhat years old. And it all started in 1986 when Financial Analysts Federation started the idea of presentation standards. And it was prompted by the fact that at that time, a lot of the firms, a lot of asset management firms were reporting performance results like in the wild west, because there are no standards and there are no rules, and all the managers would find ways to present their results to the best of their advantage, to basically cherry picking what is the best results in their firm to promote them to prospective investors. And this is not right, because everybody is saying one thing, basically comparing apples to oranges. So it was impossible for for investors to actually choose between investment firms based on information presented to them. So that was the idea of presentation standards, and that came about in 1986 by the FAF. And several years later, the standards actually got to the form of, got to a presentable form, and it was actually named after the two organizations that actually work on these standards, and that was the predecessor of CFA Institute, AIMR, the Association of Investment Management and Research. And at that time, in 1990, it was called the AIMR Performance Presentation Standards, PPS. Several years later, the US and Canada began using these standards more widely. And then in 1999, the GIPS standards were, these standards were evolved into the GIPS standard. And it was at that time that all the modifications been consolidated, and that was the year in 1999 that the GIPS standards were finally adopted as one document. But at that time, there was still a lot of country-specific, or I should say, country variation of the GIPS standards. So it was at the time that we have the foundation, core standards, but in different countries, there were variations of it. So it was not until 2001 that all the standards, actually until 2006, that all the CDG, the country version of the GIPS standards, been eliminated. That became, and they all converged to form the first version of a truly global GIPS standards. And that was in 2005. So as you can imagine, that was 15 years ago. 5 years later, in 2011, the 2010 version was issued. And then 10 years later, got to the point today that we're now talking about the 2020 GIPS standards. The reason I gave you this background is because the GIPS standards had a long history, and it also incorporated a lot of the inputs from around the world, from experts around the world, to get to the point today. Okay, so take a step back. I'm taking a step back here, and I want to share with you, what are the GIPS standards? Well, what are they? I know Ivan earlier mentioned that GIPS standards is a set of voluntary standards, and he was absolutely right. I just wanted to build on that and give you a little bit more flavor of what this is. GIPS standards, it's a set of industry standards for governing how asset management firms calculate and also present their performance results and to their prospective investors. And these are voluntary set of standards. That means that firms who actually commit to these standards, they are actually showing a higher commitment to ethical standards. They are showing their commitment to robust policies and procedures. At the same time, when more and more firms are complying with the GIPS standards, it creates a base, an equal footing for asset management firms to compare their results, compare their report cards. Because if all firms are following the same standards to present and calculate their performance outcomes, we're actually looking at apples to apples. We can actually see which firm is performing better, which firm actually does better in terms of asset allocation, in terms of picking their equity, picking their stock. So this is a background of what this is about. This is a very high-level GIPS slide showing all the GIPS standard sponsors around the world. And I just wanted to share with you the highlighted ones are the ones in APAC. There are currently 13 of them. We have GIPS sponsors in Australia, China, India, Indonesia, and so on, Japan, etc. The role of a GIPS standards sponsor is to promote the GIPS standards in that particular market. And take Japan, for example. The GIPS sponsor in Japan is the Securities Analysts Association of Japan. And that association actually takes the GIPS standards to a different level. They actually work on a translated version of the GIPS standards and make it into Japanese so that the local firms in Japan can better understand the standards and also find ways to comply to the standards. So we really appreciate the collaboration efforts and the partnership with these standards, with these GIPS sponsors, because they are our extended arms in the market, because we can be everywhere and we rely on the collaboration from this GIPS standard sponsor. Okay, so who are the GIPS standards designed for? So this is a rhetorical question. The answer for that is it's designed for any entity that manage assets, that manage investment for investors. And the way that we look at GIPS standards, it is applicable to two sets of entities. On the left-hand side are the asset owners. And by asset owners, we refer to organizations, not someone, not an individual. We're referring to asset owners such as the pension funds, endowment funds, charitable foundations, sovereign funds, and also family offices or insurance companies. On the right-hand side, we're looking at entities such as asset managers. We call them investment managers or asset managers. And these are firms that compete for business. And we're looking at organizations, not individuals. And these are asset management firms. It could be Fortune 500 firms, and it could also be local firms with 5 or 6 employees. So any asset management, any asset managers that manage assets for clients and they compete for business, they could also look into complying to GIPS standards. Most people would wonder how asset owners could benefit from the GIPS standards. And we wanted to take this opportunity to remind asset owners and that they can benefit from the GIPS standards because they, in two ways. First of all, when asset owners go out and hire external managers, they need to go through due diligence procedures. They need to review all the proposals from managers. And if they look at the proposals from all the managers, and if these managers are GIPS compliant, it would really help them go through and screen out which manager to hire. So in a nutshell, the GIPS standards could help asset owners on the screening and selection process. Okay, and the second benefit is reporting, because asset owners also need to do reporting to their oversight bodies, and being compliant with the GIPS standards, they can also prepare their own reporting according to robust policies and procedures. So they can show their reports to oversight bodies like the board of governors or board of trustees, and they can show their commitment to the best practice, following best practices. So I mentioned about comparing apples to oranges, and also comparing apples to apples when you are actually looking at managers, different asset managers, and you have lot of proposals. How do you actually screen them? So this is exactly what I was trying to refer to. Just imagine if you are the CIO of a sovereign fund and you received 50 or maybe just 30 proposals, and you have to look through them, and they all have different formats and they have different calculation methodologies. What is the best way to screen them and evaluate them and select the best one to the next stage? So if you look at GIPS compliant presentations, it really help you with this selection process. So because you're comparing apples to apples. And um, so basically that is the message here. It really helps CIOs, and it also helps asset owners when they're looking at hiring external managers. This is something that could help them. Okay. All right. This slide, I just wanted to show you why the GIPS standards is relevant and why this is effective. I want to point out a couple of highlights here. CFA Institute is an independent nonprofit organization. We prepare and promote the GIPS standards, but we don't make any revenue from the GIPS standards. We don't make any money from promoting this. We promote the GIPS standards purely for the benefit of the society, for the benefit of the investment industry. And the process of CFA Institute to developing the GIPS standards, we collaborate with different parties in the industry to make sure that what goes into the standards are relevant and they are something that the investment industry cares about. So we work through collaboration with a lot of parties. And I mentioned about the GIPS standard sponsors. We work with these people, these organizations, to make sure that what goes into the GIPS standards, what we write into provisions are relevant, and we don't just dictate the terms. And in my later slides, I will go through how we get to the point of the final draft. But I just wanted to let you know that these provisions have been vetted over and over and over again by different parties, by different working groups and committees, and to make sure they're relevant to all the stakeholders in the investment industry. I think I'm going to skip over this. This is a repeat of the benefits. In the interest of time, I'm going to jump right into why we have the 2020 version. As you can imagine, the previous version was in 2010, so that was 10 years ago. A lot had changed in the industry, and in terms of investment classes, there have been a lot of different asset classes in the industry now. The prominence of alternative investments have dominated the market and to a degree much bigger than back in 2010. So the 2020 version address a lot of the issues and also the challenges faced by alternative investment managers. And we made a lot of the changes to cater to these asset managers to make sure that the GIPS standards are relevant to all the parties, all the participants. So this is a quick timeline to show you that the 2020 version of the GIPS standards came about in 2017. It took a year to write the exposure draft, and we released the exposure draft in September 2018. And we asked the industry for comments, and we received over 5,000 comment letters from 120 organizations around the world telling us what they think about the GIPS standards. And we went through all of them in 4 months, and then we finally changed, I should say updated the final draft of the GIPS standards and release the final draft in at the end of June 2019, taking consideration of all the comments from all these organizations. So this is not this. It takes a whole village. It takes a village to get to this point. I just wanted to emphasize that point. And now, okay, the 2020 version of the GIPS standards, it's now consisted of 3 chapters, one dedicated to asset management firms, we just call them firms, and one chapter is dedicated to asset owners, and the third chapter is dedicated to verifiers. I'll go through what is the concept of verification later, but for now, I'm just going to go into some of the highlights of the GIPS standards. Just a quick time check. I think I have about 10 minutes. Is that correct, Victoria? Or Professor Lee, Ivan?
So far, good.
I'm good? Okay, I got 5 minutes or 10 minutes or so, right?
10.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Just a quick time check. All right. Okay, so let's dive right in. For the 2020 GIPS standards for firms, as you can see, it's basically divided into 3 sections. The first 3 sections are basically general provisions that talked about how a firm could go about preparing to comply with the GIPS standards. And section 4, 5, 6, and 7, they are dedicated to how to prepare a GIPS reports. And section 8 is dedicated to how to advertise your claim to your claim of compliance to the GIPS standards. As you can imagine, once a firm or an asset owner go through all the process and procedures and all the hard work to get to the point of compliance, they want to tell other people. They want to make it a competitive advantage for firms. They want to make sure that when they're competing for business, they can tell their prospective investors that they are better than other firms because they are complying with the GIPS standards. And that could be a marketing advantage for them. In terms of portfolio types under the GIPS standards, there are 3 main types of portfolios. The first one is segregated accounts. You can think of it as a portfolio owned by a single client, or a single or a couple, or maybe a single family. The second type of portfolio is broadly distributed pooled funds, and you can think of it as widely distributed pooled funds, such as mutual funds, or open-ended funds that you can buy from the open market. The third portfolio type is limited distribution pooled fund. And you can think of it as privately held funds or private equity funds or limited partnership. So you can think about it as something that is not widely distributed. It's not widely available to most investors or general public. In the GIPS standards world, there's a concept of composites, and this is something that I would like to spend a few minutes to talk about. Think about it as sort of buckets of strategies or mandates. Imagine a firm that has, say, 25 portfolios under management, and in my example here, they are in different strategies and they're color coded, and they could be segregated accounts, which is what I talked about, portfolio that is owned by a single client, or they could be funds, or they could be mutual funds, or they could be balanced funds or aggressive funds, depending on the strategy. And now think about all the colors on my screen here, on my slide here. You can tell that, for example, in my example, the light green, the lime green color, it could be, I don't know, it could be Asian equities. These four uh, uh, single uh, um, accounts, segregated accounts, they are only invested in Asian equities. Just think about Asian equities. That's the strategy, and it's owned by 4 clients. And think about the light blue, the light blue color, the 4S, the 4 single client accounts, and 1 fund. They are all invested in a particular strategy. For example, they all only invest in North American equities. That I'm just making that up. But because of the similarities of the strategies, we can group them together. Okay, so that's why they're in these buckets. So in my particular example, I could actually group all these portfolios, all 25 of them, into 5, or actually 6 particular composites, because they are grouped by the strategies, by their particular mandate or strategies. And this is the concept of composites that is sort of the foundation of GIPS standards. GIPS report, I'll just spend a couple of seconds. This is basically the way you once you comply with the GIPS standards, you would need to follow certain rules to prepare and present your results to prospective investors. And for GIPS composite report, it covers the composite results that I talked about earlier. And for GIPS pooled fund reports, they are reports on the pool funds, for example, mutual funds. And the reason why there is the pool fund report is because a lot of the broadly distributed pooled funds, they are already under a lot of regulatory requirements to prepare a monthly report or etc. to investors. So instead of burdening them with more reporting, they have less requirements when they are preparing the GIPS pooled fund reports. All right, I'm going to pick this up and go into some of the highlights that I want to go through here. I could share my slides later on. Victoria or Gina, they could help me with distributing this, but I'm going to go into some of the highlights here. In the GIPS 2020 world, there is a slight change of the rule that firms have certain options to present their returns using either the time-weighted returns or the money-weighted returns. This is a big change from 2010 version to the 2020 version. Think about money-weighted returns as internal rate of return. For the analysts, those analysts here in the audience, you would understand that time-weighted returns are compounded returns, and they actually would take away, they would actually eliminate the distorting effects of cash inflows and outflows when you're calculating the rate of return. Whereas money-rated returns, or the IRR, when you have cash inflows and outflows, it could actually change your overall rate of return quite significantly. So the GIPS 2020 version actually set out some new rules allowing firms to choose between time-weighted returns or money-weighted returns if that applies to you. In particular for alternative investment strategies, which is really hard for them to get a lot of the timely valuation of their assets. All right, mindful of the time, so I'm going to skip couple of this, and I want us to spend a minute on the concept of verification. Verification is a concept under the concept of verification under GIPS standards refers to firms getting additional confidence for their claim of compliance. As I mentioned earlier, claiming compliance to the GIPS standards is voluntary, but there is no way for us or anyone to verify what are the procedures followed in those firms. So we introduced the concept of verification so that firms could actually hire an independent third-party company or firms or consultant to go into the firm to check and audit their procedures. So this is the concept for the firms to introduce verification. They can actually advertise that. They can actually mention that their claim of compliance is verified by so-and-so. Could be by, for example, public accounting firms or by independent consultants. So it added a confidence to their claim. And this is something that could help boost the credibility of their claim of compliance. All right, I will probably stop here. I just wanted to let you know that there are a lot of resources online to learn about the GIPS standards, and I literally just scraped the service. You know, it's very technical, and there are a lot of resources, and there are also recorded videos, and there is a help desk that you can write questions to, and you can also see my email address on the screen here that I welcome questions and any questions that you might have about GIPS standards, and I'm happy to guide you to the right resource. And I will stop there to allow Professor Lee to go over his research finding. And over to you, Professor Lee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Oh, I
Eddie.
need to stop sharing my screen here. There.
Yeah, let me do my part. So, okay, I'm sharing my screen right now. So, okay, first of all, it is my pleasure to present this research report about the global GIPS standards and the domestic SITEs in Taiwan. And something about myself, just like Ivan just said, I have my associate professorship. I graduated from Virginia Tech in 2012. I got enough publications to survive in this professional. And this project is kindly sponsored by CFA Society of Taiwan, but they are very nice to keep my independence in the whole research process. So allowing me to lead my elite team of my TAs or RAs, research assistants, to interviewing everybody. So I'm responsible for any possible error for this project. So because Eddie already explained the GIPS very well, so I just quickly talk about the goal of having GIPS standards is to achieve a full disclosure and full fair representation of a performance results, and stipulates in details the weighting and the calculation methodology. So the major benefit of having a GIPS standard or complying with GIPS standards is to have improvements in transparency. So this should help in attracting the both existing and prospective clients, and strengthening internal controls and governance, which is also agreed by our interviewees, and hopefully will be making the asset managers be more attractive or be more competitive in the global market. And GIPS already have a lot of global recognitions and success. There are more than 1,700 asset management firms claims compliance, including 85 out of the 100 largest ones. And GIPS standards are being viewed as a best practice of the industry. And they have been penetrating into more than 40 countries or markets, making inroads to Saudi Arabia, China, and India. So let's turn to the brief overview of the SIT industry in Taiwan. SIT stands for Security Investment Trust Enterprise. You can say 投信投顾 in Chinese. So just a historical remark, the first SITE was established in 1983, and slowly the whole industry grew to generate the institutional investors presence in the market. And also later, more and more business are open to the asset managers. For example, the discretionary investment business was open in 2000, and private funds business was open in 2004. So the just overall size of this industry is just like this graph says. So the total AUM for the public funds is about $5.8 billion, while the about 2.6 trillion, I'm sorry, trillion, 2.6 trillion is managed under domestic management fund, mutual funds, and 3.2 trillions are under offshore funds. For discretionary investment service, it's about $1.9 trillion AUM. The private fund industry is rather small, only accounts for $38 billion. And the international presence in the Taiwanese SIT industry is actually significant. There are a lot of foreign targeted investment accounts. They account for 78% of the total AUM of public funds in Taiwan. And 36 of the discretionary investments are in foreign securities. Considering those significant international presence, you may expect a very high GIPS compliance ratio. It's not that high. We have like 3 out of a total of 16 domestic SITEs claims GIPS compliance. If you count the total AUM, they account for 23%. So it's not very low, but it's not very high. Those 3 domestic SITEs are Keisei Securities Investment Trust, Fubon Asset Management, and Capital Investment Trust Corporations. So our main research question is to further improve the adoption rate for the GIPS standards among the Taiwanese SITEs. Because of small sample size, we decide that we use in-depth interviews to conduct this research. So I bring my army of great students to conduct a lot of interviews with domestic SITEs, including all 3 of them who are GIPS compliant, and among with some others. And we also interview with the Security Investment Trust and Consulting Association, SICA, to understand the industry perspective. And we also interview FIC, Financial Supervision Commission, to understand the authority's view, and to understanding the process of attending or preparing the GIPS reports, we also interview verifiers. And more importantly, you actually want to interview asset owner in this study. So as for the asset owner's perspective, we interview the Bureau of Labor Fund, BLF, multiple times to understand its sentiment toward the GIPS standards. Why? Because BLF oversees labor insurance funds, labor retirement funds, and labor pension funds. And they account for more than 85% of total fund size of government funds. So they basically, it is the most important and representative government asset owner in the Taiwanese market. So after like 14 interviews, multiple time interviews, we learn more about this industry. So let me first report several related industry background to our findings. So what we learned first is that there is a long-standing domestic performance standards in Taiwan. which refers to the SICA's performance standards since 1996. It is widely accepted by the asset owners, asset managers, and authorities. For example, the BLF stated that, if they are trying to evaluating the candidates for the domestic investment mandates, SICA performance standard is more than enough. So this actually consistent with the pattern when we talk to CFA institutes. If your region have a widely accepted and utilized standards by the local investors, it may reduce the incentive of local asset manager to pursue GIPS compliance. Well, the converse is also true. If you have a region which is less developed, they may find the GIPS standards as a very nice benchmark to have. But unfortunately, that's not the case in Taiwan. And the second related industry background we found is the investor structure of asset managed by SITEs. The investors of public funds are predominantly individual investors. And if you look into the discretionary investments, 71% of those are institutional investors. So you may expect the demand of GIPS standards to be more likely to appear in discretionary investments. Why? Because individual investors are very used to the SICA performance, and some of our interviewees cited that it's very difficult to change the standard of reporting when you're trying to marketing to the individual investors. Yet, if you look into discretionary investments, 42% of them are insurance-linked products, where those policies actually are marketed toward individuals. So by inductions, we found that the second most important part is for the discretionary investments, which is the government funds, accounts for 31%, is the most important asset owners requesting GIPS compliance. So this leads to our main findings, which we are trying to try to understand what the main reasons domestic SITEs are not pursuing GIPS compliance in Taiwan. So from our consensus of our interviewees, the main reason for seeking GIPS compliance is to participate in the bidding of the overseas investment mandates for the major governmental funds. And this is actually quite large of market. This accounts for 30% of total BLF funds, which is like 1,534 billion NT dollars. The overseas investment mandates of government funds are actually the only cases where the asset owners require asset managers to be GIPS compliant in Taiwan. Conversely, the domestic investment mandate does not have that requirement. And so this, I'm sorry, let me just reel back a little bit. So this actually makes some of those SITE firms, SITEs are not necessarily interested in GIPS compliance because they mainly focus, if they mainly focus on the domestic investments, they are not really that interested. And also, not many of SITEs are interested in competing in this kind of mandates for overseas investment mandates, just as I said before, or even undergo international expansion. One of the most important factors is the size. If you compare the size of the Taiwan's SITEs, they are much smaller than the international competitors. When you count, well, only the top 10 SITEs in Taiwan, which five of them are domestic, have a size of the AUM that qualifies for BLF overseas investment mandates, which is US $5 billion. And even only few of them have an overseas business exposure. And if you look into that, most of those exposures are for retail business, but not for discretionary investment. So this, and take along with the fact that the SIT industries in Taiwan, mostly driven by retail investors and family funds, they are very used to the SICA performance standards, leads to that, not many SITEs may want to think about GIPS compliance in Taiwan. And perhaps the other reason, they deterred from pursuing the GIPS compliance is that even if you have the rights to join the mandate bidding, overseas mandates bidding, you may have a difficulties compete. Why? First is the size, which is talked about, and also for the relatively speaking, the those domestic SITs have a relatively shorter performance record for the international records. And one of the reasons they've been having difficulty to compete is also being cited is the quality of management team. So all of this taken together means that, okay, obtaining gate compliance becomes a long-term investment and may have a low probability turning into an actual business opportunity in near future. So a summary from the previous sections. So there's a little demand for GIPS compliance when evaluating domestic investments, and few SITs are interested in bidding overseas investment mandates and undergoing international expansion. And pursuing GIPS compliance offers little short-term benefits to Taiwan SITs. But during the whole process, we're trying to learn, how to attend the GIPS compliance in Taiwan. So this section, I'm going to share some of our findings. What we found that the main monetary cost of GIPS compliance is the verifier service charge. Just like Eddie just said, the CFA Institute has nothing to do with those kind of money. They actually does not make any money for this kind of standards. So the main monetary costs are coming from the verifier service charge. In Taiwan, we do not have the standalone consulting firms for GIPS, like maybe those are in the US. Though those verifier services are provided by accounting firms. And from interviews, they are kindly share with us the cost of initiating service around 1.5 million NT dollars. And after initiation, you do have an annual service fee. It's typically no more than the $600,000. Of course, this depends on the number of reports you need to prepare. Currently, since most of those reports are prepared for the overseas mandate biddings, the number is perhaps 1 or 2 per year. The internal effort to get the GIPS compliant, to attend the GIPS compliance, requires the input from the firm's product management, risk management, accounting, and IT departments. And this is actually being agreed upon all of our interviewees, which cited that, so basically this effort of attending GIPS compliance should come in from the top. So because this actually requires the whole company's effort. So after all of these studies, all those interviews, we have learned a lot of this industry. So we do have some kind of policy rotation or our thoughts regarding the GIPS standards development in Taiwan. For the short term, we believe that it is important to improve awareness of GIPS standards in Taiwan, especially for the asset owner side. Currently, you only have BOF, which recognize the importance of GIPS. However, if you compare that with some other countries or other regions, which you may have the sovereign funds or large investors, which also being viewing GIPS as a best standards, we need to improve the awareness on the asset owner side. And there's another thing we find during this interview process. We think we need to enhance the information availability regarding the process of attending GIPS compliance. Because what we learned during the process is that most of the SITs in Taiwan, domestic SITs, they learn of this information is coming from asking friends. But in fact, the CFA institutes, like just Eddie here, providing excellent resources is there. We just don't know it's there. So they do operating a GIPS help desk via emails, and the service is actually quite quick. And they also have Chinese-speaking representatives available, which will offer great information. Another short-term suggestions from some of our SITs, some of the SITs we interviews, is hopefully, they are hoping that VOF can separate the local management teams from the foreign management teams when evaluating overseas mandates. However, the BOF says it's very unlikely it's kind of impossible to do that. They must maintain the openness and fairness in the bidding process. However, BOF do say that they welcome and encourages bidding from the domestic SCTEs for certain mandates. They may focus on the investment targets, which the domestic firms may have a competitive advantage. For example, Asia Pacific region targets. For those kind of targets, they are very welcome for the domestic SIT to participate. And for the long-term policy recommendations, of course, everybody talks about improvements in research capability, but the more interviews we did, we realized that it's not very easy to achieve unless there's aggressive change for industry structure from the top. But we do believe that the CFA Institute and the CFA Society of Taiwan can help in terms of engagements and more education resource provided to the community. The other one is for the global expansion for the SIT industries. In the long term, we are expecting, so we're hoping that there will be more mandates focusing on the Asia Pacific region, which the local firms may have certain type of advantage. And we also have authorities and SICA, they do have some efforts trying to expand the global exposure. For example, like an Asian region fund passport, they're assessing whether to attend. And there also some kind of subsidy or some kind of awards or plans are being around to encourage the internalization. And so conclusion for this short research, the limited interest in adopting the GIPS standards actually reflecting the difficulties facing autonomous SITEs when considering global expansion. So it's not really about GIPS standards, it's about us. So while the quick resolution for these difficulties are unlikely, the CFA Institute and Civil Society Taiwan what they could do is they can improve the general awareness and the information ability in the short run, and hopefully they can facilitate those long-term structure change through the engagement in a very important human capital development. And that's all I have today. Thanks for listening. Okay, I think that's a question for me. So for our interviews, what we ask is that, well, the training is not, I would say there is some trainings, but it's not really necessary training for, GIPS. It's just it's a process of adapting the GIPS standards in which the verifiers, in this case, accounting firms, will be helping in this process. So you do have to allocate several dedicated teams or 5 to 10 people to work with the verifiers. So if that accounts for training, yes, then that will be trainings. So it's not a requirement, but that will be definitely facilitate the process very well. I hope that answered the question.
We have a question from Stratos. Would you agree that one way to beef up GIPS penetration would be to encourage domestic owners to ask asset managers in Taiwan to comply with GIPS? If yes, what is the role of local associations and government bodies? Well, I can take that question, and thank you, Stratos, for that question. That's a great question, and this is a phenomenon that we have seen in other markets, that awareness of the GIPS standards and more penetration, higher penetration rate of the GIPS standards would be achieved by demand. If it's demanded, if it's required by the asset owners or whoever's hiring these asset management firms, if they dictate the terms, then of course we will see a higher number of GIPS standards compliant firms. It is something that we've seen in definitely older markets like the US and Canada and European countries, when there are a lot of when there are a lot of asset management firms that are compliant with the GIPS standards, then asset owners would be setting the bar really high. Basically, that would be the entry ticket to be considered in the first round. But in markets that are not that doesn't when we're talking about markets that don't have a lot of GIPS compliant firms, asset owners might be more reluctant to demand that. But the way that we would approach situations like that would be raising awareness through the mouth of the asset owners. We might ask the asset owners to ask about it, but not to require it. Asking about it would raise awareness. Asking about it would sort of bring it to the radar screen of the asset management firms. It would encourage them to look into this. So so that might be a good approach in Taiwan for asset owners in Taiwan. And thank you for the questions, Stratos.
Yeah, okay. So let me just adding several points from, so from what we learned from the interviews, well, so the initial awareness of a GIPS actually kind of, there was like 4 or 5 years ago, some people, there were people now pushing GIPS in the market. But you know, once the BOF takes it into the overseas mandates, then that's perhaps the best achievement they can get. Even, you know, later when the discussion becomes whether they should apply, whether the BOF should apply that onto the domestic investment mandates, then you will face some kind of backlash from the industry. So I think here is that in Taiwan, that because the structure is that, well, it's the one thing about trying to convince BOF, but I think this way is gonna be tough to do. I think the general awareness, maybe the, you know, trying to talk about the family house, if they actually want to, you know, because they want to have the foreign investments, if they may be interested in looking into GIPS. I think that's perhaps one way to go, to the general awareness of the GIPS standards. Yeah, otherwise, I think the most other institutions who should have mostly representing individual investors will have a hard time. But the family house, I think, will be something interesting to do. And I think that's a top 3 dilemma when asset managers or firms face when comply with GIPS standards. I don't know, should I answer it for just a case in Taiwan, or just a general case? Can add into?
I'm happy to take that question. Actually, I see another question before that. There's a question from David Ying.
Yes.
Maybe I'll take it in order. I can take those 2 questions in the same order. So David's question was, since the GIPS awareness in Taiwan is minimal, what will be the CFA Institute's next move toward Taiwan markets? That's a great question. And this is, this whole event is one of the activities that we would like to do more often to raise awareness of the GIPS standards in the Taiwan market. We start with CFA Institute members. We start with society members, so that hopefully members who attend events like this could be equipped with enough information so that they can start inquiring about it, so they can start talking about it to their peers. So it's about word of mouth and also raising awareness through the industry participants. Then of course, we would like to engage with asset owners, prominent asset owners, and also government bodies to ask them to look into asking for GIPS compliance as one of the in their due diligence process. They might not require it, but we would like them to ask about it. That's the first step. and that's something that we have seen in the past in other markets. Yeah, raising awareness. I mean, people have to know what this is about before they can actually think about complying or think about looking into it. They need to know what this is in the first place. So I hope I answered your question, David. For the second question is about the three top dilemmas when asset manager or firms face when they're complying with the GIPS standards. I would say I can think of a couple. I'm not sure if I can list three. First of all, I think it's the tug of war between you know, profitability, you know, and also cost. You know, a lot of firms probably want to you know, understand upfront, you know, oh, what is in it for us to comply with the GIPS standards, and you know, what would it cost us, and you know, if we allocate resources and staff to look into complying with the GIPS standards, you know, are they going to make less money? So I think that is a common misunderstanding of the GIPS standards and the process to comply, because it's certainly, you know, I'm not going to lie to you, there will be costs. Of course, you know, it is an investment for the long term. Firms would definitely need to look into their policies and procedures, and also their way of presenting performance in the past, and how they might have to change the system. So there is tangible cost to that, but at the same time, it is something that it's for longer term, and this is an exercise that they once they go through that, it is going to allow them to be compliant for the future, and they could stay competitive for a long time. That's only one dilemma. I can't think of any other. I think for asset owners, I can think of a dilemma for asset owner, because some asset owner would be reluctant to think to ask about GIPS compliance if they are investing in alternative investment strategies, just because there is not a lot of managers who are in that space, but at the same time compliant with the GIPS standards. So they might just overlook that. Yeah, I think I can only think of those. There's more questions coming in. I think there's one for you, Professor Lee.
Okay, so there are some non-compliance SAT decline our interviews. Well, I don't know. It's like, well, I cannot really comment why they decline. It was just like they may not think, you know, since they are not pursuing it. Because I think after several interviews, we kind of realized that, you know, unless you really have a plan to get into the overseas mandates, it's very difficult from the demand side for the local SITE to argue that for the case. So the other, like for example, out of 3 of the GIPS compliant firms, one of them obviously already participate in overseas mandates. The other is saying they have plan. The only one who is not having plans, that requirement, you know, that the pursuing of GIPS is coming from the very top, the chairman of a board. So he says, okay, this is a best practice, we should pursue it. Other than that, it will be very difficult for them to pursue, you know, without the immediately, you know, investment opportunities. It will be difficult for those unless you have the support from the top. It will be have a tough time to convince people to say, okay, even though the monetary cost is not that high, people keep citing that. So it's like, okay, so if that's not on their mind, they've been not required to do that, they may just say, okay, there's nothing too much we can share with us about, so that's why they decline. I'm just guessing. There's another question. What's the reason of CIPM not setting this verification as a mandatory? Oh, I think that's for Eddie.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'll take this last question. And That's a really good question, Frida, and I can't tell you definitively what is the answer, but I can tell you what I think was the reason. First of all, the concept of verification has been around for all these versions. It's not just in the 2020 version. So I could tell you that we haven't changed that from 2010 to 2020. Um, that did not answer your question, but at the same time, whatever the reason was when we were drafting the older version, it still applies today. And I can guess this is my view of why verification is not mandatory. It's because, first of all, verification does cost firms extra uh, uh, costs, expenses to achieve. They need to hire independent third-party firms to go through the verification procedures, and it takes another couple of months before they can actually claim that their um, claim of compliance is verified. So there is a time delay for any firms to get to that point. And the reason I say that is because for any newly GIPS compliant firms, for them to go through the entire process to get to compliance, it takes months. It sometimes takes, a couple of years for big firms to actually go through all the internal processes, and they might have to change their performance calculation systems. They might have to change the software, IT infrastructure. So it's a big maneuver. It's a big project for firms to go from day one to go through the whole journey to the point that they can say, okay, we're finally compliant. We are comfortable to claim compliance now. Uh, and if we add another requirement for them, okay, wait, you need to get that now verified by an independent third-party firm, that is just an extra hurdle for firms to cross. And that to me personally, I find that would be a deterrent for firms to consider compliance in the first place. And my view of GIPS compliance is that you're attaining to, you're complying with the best practices in the industry around the world. You are supposed to know what you're doing. You're supposed to be following the highest ethical standards. Then, if we require that, okay, wait, you need to get that verified, it's sort of defeat the purpose. So I think personally that was the reason why we did not make verification a mandatory requirement, but an additional um, um, an additional assurance for those firms to say that, hey, not only are we committing to the highest ethical standards, but we also get that verified, and that became an additional advantage for those firms.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So I think today's section will be end here. And let's thank you, Eddie and Professor Lee, for deliver today's event. And probably if you have any questions you need to raise up, you can send to CFA Society Taiwan's email.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone on the call, for joining. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a night.